Welcome to EWTN News Nightly. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell. Tonight's top stories. A government shutdown continues and new information comes to light about abortion coverage in Obamacare. We'll talk with congressmen from both parties about what Catholics need to know. The Catholic Church marks the 25th anniversary of Blessed Pope John Paul II's groundbreaking document on women. Now Pope Francis is calling for a new theology of woman. We'll talk about what that might entail. And as many parochial schools struggle for survival, one parish school in Maryland is taking a bold approach to renewal by going back to the classics. We have the story. Thanks for joining us. Tonight, the standoff in Washington continues. As Republicans and Democrats trade the blame, a partial government shutdown is now in its 9th day. And on the horizon, a deadline for the U.S. government to increase its debt limit or risk defaulting on its loans. President Barack Obama has called upon congressional Republicans to drop their call for changes to his signature health care law known as Obamacare. But Speaker of the House John Boehner rejected the overture, saying that would require unconditional surrender from GOP lawmakers. People across the country are being affected by the partisan gridlock. So how is the government shutdown impacting the Catholic Church? We took a look. $25,000 a day. That's the shutdown's financial hit on Catholic charities of the Archdiocese of Washington.
$125,000 a week is a lot of money for us to try to carry. If it goes on too long, we just, it'll be hard for us to do it.
Since Congress has not approved a budget for D.C., the district's Medicaid program is not reimbursing Catholic charities.
The good news is we have a little bit of a cushion. We're not going to go out of business because of this.
Monsignor John Ensler, President and CEO of Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Washington, says he expects the government will reimburse Catholic charities later. The federal shutdown is also impacting the Archdiocese for the Military Services, which oversees Catholic ministries to U.S. military. All active duty military chaplains have been able to serve, but there were some hurdles for civilian priests.
There was a family that was to be married on Saturday. They had gone through marriage prep with their GS priest at their installation, but because that GS priest wasn't allowed to work, they had to find an active duty priest, bring him in.
On Saturday, the U.S. House passed a resolution 400-1 to fix the problem. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel has also reinstated most civilian employees. And while national museums, parks, and monuments are closed, a rally for immigration reform yesterday was allowed to pass the barricades blocking off the National Mall. But tour buses that are not allowed into the federal sites have been detouring here, the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. They've seen an uptick in visitors.
It is a beautiful place, and it's beautiful. I'd like to be here, but again, this is not why we came to Washington, D.C.
Veterans did their job, and some people in Congress aren't doing theirs, and it's a shame because we had planned this. We planned this for quite some time.
But while unplanned, it wasn't all negative for veteran Ed McLaughlin of Washington State.
For me, this is like coming home, because years ago I came here as a very small child.
Meanwhile, a Catholic Relief Services official tells us they expect a brief shutdown will have little, if any, immediate impact on their international relief and development work. That's because funding for many projects is already in the pipeline. At the center of the shutdown is Obamacare. Disagreement over the health care law has prevented both parties from coming together. And many Catholics have a number of concerns about Obamacare. A new bill unveiled today aims to address one of those concerns. Here to tell us about the Abortion Insurance Full Disclosure Act are the co-chairs of the Congressional Pro-Life Caucus. We have with us Congressman Chris Smith, a Republican from New Jersey, and Congressman Dan Lipinski, a Democrat from Illinois. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Congressman Smith, I'll start with you. You're the lead sponsor of this. Tell us what this act is and why it's necessary.
Well, you know, both Dan and I and 120 plus members have already introduced the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, which would take abortion out of Obamacare. We passed it in the last Congress. The Senate failed to embrace it, so that remains in limbo. This legislation says that now that the Obamacare exchanges are being set up across the country, we're discovering, not surprisingly, but still shockingly, that abortion is being subsidized through the tax credits. It's finding itself, Connecticut and Rhode Island, for example, every one of the insurance plans on their exchange will have abortion on demand included within it. And that's going to be the case in most of the larger states like California, perhaps. Maybe there might be one pro-life plan. This legislation says that because of a secrecy clause that is in the Obamacare law, people are not going to be told in any way, shape, or form that is meaningful. It'll be buried somewhere, if that, maybe on page 90. And what they won't be told is that they have to pay money every month as part of their premium into a special fund, so-called segregated fund, that does nothing but fund abortions. So pro-life Americans all across the country will be duped, will be deceived into buying an insurance plan that includes abortion funding on demand, and all the tax credits that people will be using to buy their funding, their insurance plans, will also include abortion. And you and I and every other taxpayer will be footing that bill as well.
So how does this act address
This
that?
requires that there be full disclosure in a way that is meaningful, in a way that says that both on the segregated funds, the special surcharge, as they call it, as well as in Obamacare itself, if a plan has abortion in it, the consumer of health insurance must be told up front in a very, very prominent way. We put the word prominent right into the text because right now it is totally obscure, and obscure by design.
And Congressman Lipinski, you're a co-sponsor of this legislation. What do you think the chances are for passage? I mean, we're hearing not good, and often due to Democrats, especially in the Senate, who just, are kind of blocking any of these types of changes.
Well, first of all, I think that 3.5 years ago, I fought against Obamacare. What the final bill was, I had worked with Bart Stupak before that to get the language changed so that we didn't have taxpayer subsidy for abortion. Unfortunately, we failed to win on that. But in the legislation, there are two things that really need to be enforced. They're actually in there. And one of them is that everyone is supposed to have an option of having a plan that they can purchase that does not have abortion coverage in it. And as Chris said, that we see that's not the case. Now that the exchanges are up and running, we see that is not the case. The second part, and what this bill really aims at, is transparency. When we were debating health care reform, one of the biggest topics that everyone was talking about was transparency, that insurance companies should not be able to hide anything in the fine print. And that was one of the things that on these insurance exchanges, we were going to be able to see the fine print. There'd be nothing hidden from us. But now we're finding, now the exchanges are up, we can see the exchanges. We can't see if there's abortion coverage in these plans. So Americans cannot go out there. I can't go out there and look for and find a plan that does not cover abortion. And the difference that makes is it's not just the taxpayer money, our taxpayer money, going to subsidize abortion. If I buy a health insurance plan that covers abortion, my premium dollars are going to be going to cover abortion also. That is wrong, and we were promised that that was not going to happen.
Congressman Smith, let's talk a little bit about Obamacare, since that's so much what this is about, and of course what the shutdown is related to. The U.S. bishops obviously have been very critical of the Obama administration on the HHS mandate and on these kinds of abortion-related and religious liberty-related problems. However, they were also very clear throughout the health care reform debate that they supported universal health care, and they were very much on board for a long time with this legislation until the end, when it became clear that these abortion problems were not going to be addressed the way they felt they needed to. So what do you say to those who say, look, other than this piece of this legislation, Obamacare is pretty good legislation that does uphold a lot of Catholic values in terms of broader access to health care?
Well, I think it was written, certainly it was written by a lot of lobbyists and people behind closed doors, which is unfortunate. The president said that the entire proceedings, including House Senate conferences, would be on C-SPAN so people could watch the law as it was being crafted. None of that happened. The president also came to a joint session of Congress and said that there would be no federal funding for abortion, and in his executive order said that this legislation would comport with the Hyde Amendment. This completely violates the Hyde Amendment. What people in the administration are trying to get everyone else to overlook is is that the Hyde Amendment says we will not support with public dollars any plan that has abortion in it. These plans have abortion in it, public dollars are supporting it, complete violation of Hyde.
So
the rest of the legislation, as you would suggest, there were some good things in it, pre-existing health insurance. My wife and I had that happen when we had our first child. I changed jobs, and the entire birthing process, the delivery, was not covered by the insurance, and we were set back about $3,000.
So would you support this if it weren't for the abortion?
No, there's much in it that is not what the bishops and others would have wanted. It incentivizes the end of employer-based health care. It has huge taxes attached to it. The Congressional Budget Office said that 10 years from now, there will still be 30 million Americans who do not have health insurance. And the idea of an individual mandate that says you either buy health insurance, and when fully phased in, the penalty will go, what, $600 or $700? When have we told people you buy something, or you get a government penalty imposed upon you?
Congressman, I just want to make sure and get Congressman Lipinski in on this. Almost out of time. You voted against Obamacare in 2010, but you've also voted against recent attempts in the House to repeal or alter aspects of it, including one attempt that had some conscience rights language that was similar to the language in the act that you actually co-sponsor, which the bishops were very supportive. So what's your sense? I mean, I know you've been very critical of the shutdown. Do you think it's worth prolonging the shutdown over some of these issues, or do you think the shutdown needs to end and then you address these?
Well, if I thought that we could actually accomplish something like protecting conscience, which I've strongly supported, I could be supportive of what's been going on. But we knew that that was not going to happen. That was not going to go anywhere. I think a government shutdown is bad. We should avoid a situation where we have a government default. Those are bad, but we should be changing Obamacare, trying to fix it, starting with the abortion provisions, but other provisions that I think are not going to work. I think the overall plan, the idea of getting more people covered with health insurance is good, and we can all agree upon that. However, I think there are some fatal flaws that this is not going to work in the long run. It's going to cost more. It's really, we're not going to be able to pay for it. We're not going to be able to afford it. So that, on top of the abortion issues, are reasons why I oppose it in the first place. And I've been working to try to make changes to it. There have been 13.
Do you think that's possible, given the current makeup of the Senate? And
things are starting to change on some of these issues. There are some changes that have been made to Obamacare. There are a couple of major provisions that we've been able to get changed. I think more members on both sides of the aisle are saying, hey, let's get together and make some changes. And that's where I've been ever since this was passed. But first and foremost, we need, if we keep getting back to the first issue, if we keep the focus on transparency, I think that we can make the case to the administration that they need to fix this when it comes to abortion. People should know if abortion is covered in their plan that they're buying through a health insurance exchange. If we keep up that pressure, maybe we can get the administration to make that change, as they have made other changes as we've gone along this year.
Colleen, I would say to every one of those who are watching this show, ask. I mean, you may get different answers, and that's part of the problem. We were online and actually went on. I called a number of healthcare providers, and they gave different answers as to whether or not abortion was in it. I said, where is the paperwork so I can go online and assess it? Well, it's not ready yet. We don't have it. So I would encourage, admonish, plead with everyone before they buy anything on the exchange. Ask and get it in writing. And if it's an abortion plan, please don't support it.
Congressman Smith, Congressman Lipinski, thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
We have to run to a break right now, but we'll be right back with more EWTN News Nightly. Welcome back to EWTN News Nightly. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell. In Rome, the Vatican has just announced that the next Synod of Bishops will take place a year from now, in October 2014. The meeting is an opportunity for the Pope to hear from local church leaders. EWTN News Nightly's Alan Holdren is in Rome with the details. Alan, what's this Synod's theme?
Colleen, the coming Synod is going to be focused on the pastoral care of the family. Now, there are already people speculating that one of the main topics will be the care of divorced and remarried Catholics. We know that in about a year's time, in October, there are going to be 150 bishops here, along with a number of experts, to discuss that and many other themes affecting the family.
And Alan, we told our viewers last week about a revealing interview the Pope gave to a well-known Italian atheist, but in the last few days there have been some controversy over that interview. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, it appears he got some of the details wrong. Eugenio Scalfari is his name, and he was describing this mystical experience that the Pope told him about in his interview. This experience is said to have taken place while the Pope was deciding whether or not to accept the papacy. Scalfari says that the Pope retired to a room beside the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica to pray about it. The problem is there is no balcony, there is no side room beside the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. So this and other details were called into question. The problem is that there's no recording of the interview. Scalfari was relying on notes and his own personal memory. The Vatican has since, however, said that the basic trustworthiness of the interview has been confirmed.
Got to remember to record those interviews. Alan, also one issue that's dogged Pope Francis since his election are the accusations we've heard that he was somehow complicit with Argentina's dictatorship in the 70s and 80s. But there's a new book out that says the Pope actually saved many lives during Argentina's dirty war. You interviewed that author recently. What did he tell you?
Well, Nello Scavo is his name. He's from Italy, and he says that the Pope did a lot to help normal people there in Argentina during the dictatorship. He's been called into question a number of times over the last 40 years. Most recently in 2010, he was called in for a trial to question him on his involvement and whether or not he helped the Argentinian government to find dissidents and detain them. In fact, in his new book, Bergoglio's List, Scavo says that the Pope actively aided thousands of people, and he may have even saved as many as 1,200 lives. When we caught up to Nello Scavo, he said that there were some truly remarkable stories. One is about a judge, the first female judge in Argentina, that the Pope protected at the risk of his own life. And this is what he said.
Bergoglio organizzò il modo.
Bergoglio set up a way to keep her hidden away and to help her meet once or twice a week with her children in Jesuit institutions. He himself hid her in his car. He took her to the college and gave her the opportunity to see her children and subsequently to return into hiding. All of this continued until the government's attention on her came to an end. In this case, Bergoglio did all of this at a risk to his life and reputation.
Fascinating. Okay, thank you, Alan. Well, another interesting happening to note in the Eternal City. Tomorrow, a group of women from around the world will be meeting at the Vatican. They'll be marking the 25th year since Blessed Pope John Paul II released Mulieris Dignitatem. That was his groundbreaking apostolic letter on the dignity and vocation of women. That letter was the first document of the Catholic Church's pontifical magisterium dedicated totally to women. Its anniversary comes on the heels of Pope Francis's recent call for the Church to develop a new theology of woman. With me to discuss both topics is Dr. Margaret Harper McCarthy, a professor of theology at the John Paul II Institute here in D.C., and Gloria Purvis, chairperson for Black Catholics United for Life. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dr. McCarthy, I'll start with you. What is the significance of Mulieris Dignitatem? You've called it the New Feminist Manifesto. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's the first in a series of documents issued by John Paul II, and then later also by Cardinal Ratzinger when he was the head of the CDF. It, I think, is what it would provide the deepest roots for what Pope Francis is calling for, and that is to think out the meaning of the feminine, the meaning of woman, at its deepest roots in the nature of God himself. In Mulieris Dignitatem, he spoke of a unity in difference, or an equality in difference, not an equality in sameness.
How is that different than the secular understanding of feminism?
So we tend, and before Christianity, but still now, we tend to think that the difference, especially with respect to children and women, means inferiority. With the revelation of the Christian God, we put the last nail in the coffin of that idea. However, the idea is still very prevalent in our minds. And so he roots any thinking about the unity and difference between man and woman in God himself, who is a unity in difference and equality in difference.
So how do you think all of this relates to Pope Francis's call that we have a more fully developed theology of women? I mean, obviously he's aware of John Paul's work, but he seems to want to take it even further. What do you think he has in mind?
Yeah, perhaps first of all, we don't know a lot of what he has in mind. He has spoken a little bit about this in a couple interviews, so in a certain sense we have to wait and see what he has in mind. But his comments seem to be, I mean, one, cautionary against thinking of the woman or the feminine in terms of what function she can have, what sort of jobs or sort of active jobs she can have in the church. On the other hand, I think where he wants to go with it positively is perhaps as a corrective against a bureaucratic understanding of the church. The church is an NGO or as a corporation. He's always insisting that the church is both feminine and masculine, both Marian and Petrine, and with a certain primacy to the Marian dimension. So before the church is a hierarchy or a clergy, it is first Mary in her with respect to Jesus.
And Gloria, let's talk a little bit about this idea of the church as Marian. What does that mean to you as a woman?
Well, I have to tell you, when I think of that, I think of my trip during the Great Jubilee to St. Peter's, and there's an image on the door there of this large Mary, loving, comforting, nurturing, and this little Pope coming up to her, like holding on almost like to her skirt like a child. And it just struck me as that is the best image of church as mother. Isn't who we go, she's who we go to when we are in need, when we're in doubt, and to show that the Pope himself is this little bitty child really in the presence of the Blessed Mother who will comfort and help him, I think is such a missed message for the woman of today, because motherhood is so seen as something to be avoided, as a barrier. But when we look at that, it really opens up, or should open up, our perspective on the dignity of women, the specialness of motherhood, and something we should contemplate in light of the woman's role with the Holy Spirit. Because the Holy Spirit's how God says, I believe in the Lord and giver of life, we say during the Creed. Well, that has a special meaning then in terms of how motherhood comes to be, the very hand of the Holy Spirit on us. And I would like us to contemplate that in that theology of woman.
Absolutely. Another interesting parallel, it seems to me, between John Paul and Francis. In John Paul's letter to women, he talks about women having the gift of humanizing structures. And Pope Francis said recently, the feminine genius is needed wherever we make important decisions, and we need to think about the specific place of women also in those places where the authority of the church is exercised. So he seems to be wanting to bring women into more the decision-making role, part of the, at least, process more visibly, maybe?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what he has in mind.
Yeah.
What is your sense?
Well, I was thinking of right here in the Archdiocese of Washington, we have a female chancellor. At the parishes where I've been a member, we've had women in all levels sitting there at the table with the priests and laymen making decisions. We aren't invisible, but maybe that isn't the experience of the broader church. I also started to, in context of his whole interview in America magazine, I started to think about how can the structures be broadened to take into account the various stages of a woman's life. Sometimes we're daughters, we're mothers with children, we're mothers with elderly parents. How can we have some flexibility in our structures so that we can bring women at all those various stages to participate more fully? So that's sort of the things I was thinking about when I heard the quote.
Interesting. And Margaret, just real quick, we only have a second left, but this Pope has been clear that there will not be women priests, and yet he is making some bold statements. Do you see those two in contradiction? Because the secular media often does.
Absolutely not. As you said, he has just excommunicated someone in Australia on account of his position on women priests. And the way to understand, I mean, both of these things is not so much a contradiction, but in terms of this equality in difference that he so emphasizes, and that in the church means the cooperation between the Marian and the Petrine dimensions of the church.
And Margaret, Gloria, we're out of time, but thank you both for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Pope Francis also visited Assisi last week to mark the feast of St. Francis, his namesake. When he was there, he called on Catholics to strip themselves of worldliness and humbly serve the poor. That call dovetails neatly with the message of World Homeless Day, which is tomorrow, October 10th. And one issue that plagues many homeless is a lack of adequate nutrition. Studies from such schools as Baylor College of Medicine and the University of Nevada, Las Vegas suggest that food served in homeless shelters often lacks adequate nutrients. But that's not always the case. EWTN News Nightly's Jason Calvi found a Washington, D.C.-based kitchen taking a fresh approach to the problem.
Breakfast time at Miriam's Kitchen, just a mile from the White House.
Salad this morning.
Salad for breakfast?
Realization is so many of our guests don't have fresh vegetables any part of their day.
It's not just the greens that make this place different. It's guests, like Jay, eat for free.
Can be trying sometimes finding, getting a place to stay, getting something to eat, and a place to sleep.
You see, the guests here are homeless. Kitchen opened in 1983, an interfaith partnership of Presbyterian, Jewish, and United Church. It's now an independent organization with volunteers from various faiths and backgrounds, including Catholic Kim Smollett.
We all need really good food to fuel our bodies, and when you're homeless, you need that even more.
Like other American adults, the homeless, 1 in 3 of them are obese. A team of researchers from Harvard Medical School and Oxford University say one of the causes is that cheap food is often loaded in fat and in sugar. Here at Miriam's Kitchen, chef Steve Batt has spent 12 years slicing through that food flaw.
And when I started, it was canned vegetables, canned fruit, powdered eggs, powdered milk. And would you open a can of fruit and give it to your guest, your family member? Would you use powdered eggs? You know, would you not prepare omelets if you could prepare omelets?
Now they're cooking meals from scratch.
Even though dressings are made homemade from scratch.
The ingredients for a healthy meal costing the kitchen just $1 per guest. 1,700 volunteers, plus donated food.
Look at all this awesome stuff from the farmer's market. Peppers, peppers, peppers. These are legs of lamb. This is all this eggplant. Almost 500 pounds of gorgeous tomatoes.
The White House Garden also donates veggies, and the nutritious food is just the first course.
And the goal is to get our guests to sit down for a great meal. And if we can get them to sit down for a great meal, we can link them up with case management. And once we link them up with case management, we can try to get them off the streets.
So that nutritious breakfast at Miriam's can lead eventually to breakfast at home. Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
We close tonight with a story of renewal. At a time when many Catholic schools are struggling with declining enrollment and rising costs, one parish school in Hyattsville, Maryland is taking a different approach to school reform, an approach that could make it a national model. EWTN News Nightly's Wyatt Goolsby has the story.
From the outside, it looks like any other Catholic school in the United States. Middle schoolers switching rooms between classes, kindergartners led by the hand to their next activity. But inside the classroom, things aren't as typical as they look.
Could you say that with me, please? Theseus and the Minotaur.
That's right, Theseus and the Minotaur. These first graders are writing the names, coloring the pictures, and explaining the story behind the classic Greek myth.
Eaten by the Minotaur.
Welcome to St. Jerome Academy in Hyattsville, Maryland. It's one of the first Catholic schools in the nation to develop and implement its own classical curriculum, and one of the only places you'll find first graders pointing out islands in the Ionian Sea.
It's land that's all surrounded by water. Thank you, Claudia.
4 years ago, facing declining enrollment and funding, the parish community made the decision to switch from a more mainstream curriculum to a classical one.
I've talked to a lot of parents who have become just so frustrated with the testing culture in schools, the prominence of pop culture that's somewhat negative for our students.
Volunteers and teachers, along with scholars from nearby Catholic University of America, united to design a unique school plan. That plan has made St. Jerome's one of the go-to places for educators looking for a unique Catholic take on what's called the Latin Trivium. The Trivium is a medieval education plan focused on 3 disciplines: grammar, logic, and rhetoric.
I think some people look at this and say, this is great. This is helping our children to learn what is good, beautiful, and true.
Nowadays, these students are getting back to the basics, old school basics.
Vis peccatoribus nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Yes, you heard correctly. Students at an early age are learning Latin.
So we had enrolled them in kindergarten, and we went to the orientation, and the teacher said, you know, well, we're going to be studying Latin. And I looked at my husband and said, yeah, right. You know, we'll see how that happens. But really, at the end of the first year of kindergarten, he had a good vocabulary of Latin words.
Dr. Jem Sullivan, a theologian, is one of many Catholic parents who say it's the classical education with a focus on faith and salvation history that's prompted her and her husband Scott to choose the school for her son Benedict.
Just the moral development, the moral thinking of right and wrong, understanding the questions of truth. And society and how a society was built on certain ideals. Those are things that he's learning in second grade that I think is just wonderful.
And it's been attracting a lot of the younger families, and it's been good for the school.
Father James Stagg, pastor at St. Jerome's, says that since the school and parish adopted the new curriculum, they fielded phone calls from principals and superintendents across America who want to learn more about their program.
Is like coming together.
Many educators say it's not just historical facts or Latin vocabulary that makes the curriculum successful. History teacher Amy Clayton says the school's emphasis on developing critical thinking skills has created a more vibrant classroom.
Our goal is for the children to read well, write well, speak well, and think well. That's the essence. We want them to reach the higher goods, wisdom and virtue.
And that's the bottom line here at St. Jerome, cultivating wisdom and virtue. There's no doubt that nationwide challenges like skyrocketing cost of education are still impacting this growing community. But Father Stack says that St. Jerome's focus on those central values and reliance on the grace of God keep them moving forward.
And I try to focus more on what we're doing on the positive side. You know, I think I've often trusted that the Lord was going to take care of the money. You know, and if we're faithful to what we're called to do, then we'll be able to continue, you know, serving, you know, the people.
That's all for tonight. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And you can catch our entire program again on EWTN's YouTube page. I'm Colleen Carroll Campbell, and on behalf of all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.